What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with Tech Daily, and in this video, I'll be giving my full review of the new Samsung Galaxy A51. I've had this phone for a couple of weeks now, and not only have I had the opportunity to really put this device to the test, but I've also compared it to some other Samsung A-series phones on the channel, and I've received a lot of questions and comments from you guys that I also hope to answer in this video. Now, I think given the popularity of Samsung's A50 last year and a lot of new attention from US customers who were probably introduced to this mid-range line of phones for the very first time, I suspect that this year the A51 will once again be on a lot of people's radars in the coming months, especially when this device launches on more carriers. And honestly, in a world of $1,000 plus smartphones, the value that this phone offers, I think, far exceeds what you get in the end from a flagship device. First things first, let's talk design. From last year's A50 to this year's A51, Samsung basically polished what was already pretty good, but ultimately made this device something that rivals any flagship on the market today. Going from a teardrop notch to the Infinity O cutout for the front camera was definitely needed. That's the style I like, and this setup is even smaller than what you might see on the Note 10, for example. The bezels all the way around have shrunk a bit too, particularly that bottom chin, which is much more even compared to the rest of the edges. Overall, this is a device that looks like a 2020 smartphone from the front. And around back, we get that glossy, shiny rainbow effect on a hard plastic housing that's paired with a hard plastic polished frame. If you're familiar with the glass sandwich design and metal frame of flagship phones, this is a step down. But honestly, in the hand, this is a phone that still feels premium. And personally, going with a glasstic or faux glass design is better for durability anyway. Dropping this phone doesn't trigger the usual heart attack I might get if I were to drop the $1,200 all-glass S20. I know the A51 can at least handle a bit more abuse. And conveniently enough, even if you are worried about durability, Samsung includes a decent clear rubber case in the box, so you can protect that brand new phone the second you set it up, which is great. Unfortunately, there is one thing it can't exactly handle: water. With no IP rating for this device, you'll need to be a bit more careful around sinks, showers, and pools. Over the years, I've gotten pretty numb to my smartphones taking on water, so the lack of any guarantee here is definitely something I took into consideration. Another feature lacking with this device is wireless charging. Now, personally, I couldn't care less. Wireless charging is not something I prioritize, so I don't consider this a negative at all, but I know a lot of people consider it a significant missing feature for whatever reason. Taking a look around the rest of the phone, there are a couple of other things worth pointing out. You've got your usual button placement for the power and volume switch, and a dual SIM and SD card tray off to the left. At the bottom, you'll find a headphone jack, which is much appreciated, and you do get a pair of earbuds in the box too, which is nice. And there's a USB-C charging port down there as well, and one single speaker. And honestly, if I could pick just one thing to improve on this device, it would be that speaker. In general, it's good, not great, a bit muffled the louder you go. Maybe I just use the speaker more than most people, but every time I listen to it, I'm reminded just how much better of a speaker setup a lot of other phones have nowadays. It's certainly usable, it's not bad, but it has the potential to be significantly better. Like most mid-range and flagship smartphones, the A51 hides its fingerprint sensor under the front glass. Now, I've said in previous videos about this phone that I found it to be not the most accurate thing in the world. I believe that partly has to do with the built-in screen protector that ships on this device. I've reset my fingerprint a couple of times, and I've seen some improvements when I really take the time to scan and set it up. And also, as I've used this phone, I've gotten more used to it as well. But personally, I found Face Unlock to be a bit more reliable for me. The lift to wake and auto lock setup means that you have access to the phone right away. And with the improvements to the front-facing camera, which I'll talk about in a minute, I think Face Unlock is the better choice, all things considered, at least when it comes to strictly unlocking and accessing your device as quickly and accurately as possible. Obviously, for security's sake, it's not the better option, but that's a whole nother conversation. One of the things I was most impressed with by last year's A series phones, especially the A50, was what Samsung offers with the display, with a massive 6.5-inch screen, an excellent screen-to-body ratio like I mentioned earlier, and it's a Super AMOLED panel. Sure, it's only 1080 resolution, but the bright, bold colors, excellent detail, and flawless viewing angles make this a device that I think can really wow people when they see it. I think the screen itself is probably the most underrated and underappreciated aspect of Samsung's A series line altogether. Now, no, obviously it can't compete with a flagship device, but at the end of the day, this is a phone that offers probably the best viewing experience for the price. And that's something that also extends to the A51 and likely all the other new A series phones that Samsung plans to launch throughout the year. Inside, the A51 is powered by Samsung's own Exynos 9611 chipset, which is a slight step up from the 9610. But I'll say up front that if you're buying this phone specifically for a performance boost over the A50, you'll likely be disappointed. The GPU is the same Mali G72 we've had for a while, and you've got the same RAM options to choose from, either 4 or 6 gigs. So the phone I have here is the standard 4 gigs of RAM device, and that's how I'm judging my experience with performance. And unfortunately, I just can't comment right now on how much better, if at all, the A51 with 6 gigs of RAM might perform. With all that being said though, I still think this is a device that performs well under usual conditions for most day-to-day tasks. I've had only a few hiccups with strange lag or an app crash, probably 5 or less instances that were noticeable. Beyond that, this phone has been able to handle anything I personally need to do, and even pushing it a bit harder with games like PUBG at its highest settings or Asphalt 9, I haven't found really any frame drops or performance issues at all. Keep in mind, this was actually the first new Samsung phone of the year to ship with Android 10 and One UI 2. It's usually the S line that gets the first major Android updates, so a sort of interesting move here by the company, and I think more than anything just shows how much they're pushing this A series line and trying to offer the best software experience possible. Realistically, this phone will likely see 2 years of supported updates, and looking ahead long term, I think this phone will be fine for that length of time, maybe a little longer, but if you're hoping to keep this device for 4 or 5 years, you might be better off investing a little more money and going with something like the A71 instead, which has noticeably better internal specs. Powering this phone is a pretty respectable 4000 milliamp battery, which I found to be really solid in day-to-day use. I end most days with 30% left or more, and while it isn't the crazy powerhouse that the M30S is, I don't have any complaints. The only gripe I have is Samsung's decision to stick with 15-watt fast charging support rather than going with a 25-watt standard. I can of course still get a few hours of use from 30 minutes or so on the charger, which is great, and I guess Samsung just needed one more thing to differentiate this device from the higher-end A71. I think the biggest thing this phone has going for it has to be the camera capabilities. It's pretty widely known that mid-range and budget phones really tend to fall short with pictures and videos, but Samsung's efforts in improving that experience with the A51 definitely paid off. Hardware-wise, we get a crazy 4-lens setup, which includes an upgraded 48 megapixel main lens, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a brand new 5 megapixel macro lens. Right off the bat, let me just say that the macro lens is pretty gimmicky. Not only is it buried in the extra options, I don't think it's even really all that useful. Taking super up close pictures might be fun for like a minute, but I don't know that you'll be using it all that often. The rest of the camera setup though is really quite good. I've snapped dozens of pictures now with this phone over the last couple of weeks, and I haven't been disappointed at all. With the standard lens, I found that pictures had great color balance, a fair amount of detail, and overall, no matter the lighting conditions or subjects, I couldn't find that much to critique. The only disappointing aspect of the cameras had to do with the wide angle lens. It tended to lose a lot of the shadows and dark areas for whatever reason, but it still offers a decent picture, all things considered. Overall, as long as you aren't directly comparing these results to some $1,000 flagship, you won't be disappointed. Like I said, these mid-range phones haven't always offered a lot with the camera quality, but Samsung went ahead and made some great improvements. In regards to video quality, there's definitely some potential here, at least filming in 1080p with the extra video stabilization option enabled. The focus tracking isn't amazing, as you can see, and when you bump up to 4K video recording, which doesn't support the extra video stabilizing, you lose a lot of stability, which is unfortunate. Overall though, I don't think the camera improvements found with pictures translate all that well to the video recording, and it's probably the biggest weakness, at least with the camera capabilities specifically for this phone. Up front, Samsung really made some solid improvements with the selfie camera. We get new hardware, a 32 megapixel f2.2 aperture lens, and a new capability, 4K video recording, which is a pretty high-end option on a front-facing camera. The front camera on the A50, in my opinion, was not all that great, and with the A51, I think we're seeing the improvements we needed for sure. So here are all my final thoughts on the A51. I think especially here in the US market, this device is far and away the best value smartphone that you can buy right now. Internationally, with Xiaomi and Realme and some other brands offering solid options, the choice is tougher, but I suspect that this device will once again be incredibly popular in the coming months when more carriers offer it and it's more widely available. Now, I still think I prefer the A71 over this device for the long term, but for the price and the value, the A51 is an awesome choice, and I don't think you'll regret it.